Welcome to the Muscles and Veggies Fitness Podcast. My name is Zach with musclesandveggies.com. What is this podcast about? Nutrition, health, fitness, all perfectly packaged together in a bite-sized podcast to help educate and motivate you to stay on your fitness journey. Today, we are talking about protein. Protein. This is a controversial topic in the health and fitness space. It's probably the most misunderstood as well. So the questions we aim to answer today: how much protein do we actually need? And what kinds of protein are the best? And then lastly, what about protein powders? What do we want to look for? What do we want to avoid? So when it comes to protein, basically, I'm going to give you my experience over the last decade of living this or researching this. But basically, it comes down to who are you and what type of person are you? And that determines your protein requirements. For example, how much protein does the body require? Well, who are we talking to? Are we talking to a normal, everyday, non-athlete person who works a sedentary job? That person may only require about 40 to 60 grams of protein in a sitting. What about your naturally active person? Maybe they hit the gym a few times a week. They get, 10,000 steps a day. They try to be as active as they can be. Well, this person may only require about 60 to 100 grams of protein. Now, my athletes and my elite athletes, they require a little bit more protein. For example, I would consider myself a normal athlete. I mountain bike every other day. I lift weights every other day. I get 10,000 steps a day. I work with my hands doing construction as well as my personal training business. I'm an active person. I maintain all my size, and I'm a 200 pound, 190 pound muscular man. And 100 to 120 grams of protein is all I consume on a daily basis. My elite athletes, when I used to do triathlon, and the guys that I coach that are still doing elite athlete type activities, powerlifting, strongman, Ironman, marathons, that kind of thing, we're looking to about 120 to 200 grams of protein, depending on how big they are, how much muscle they have, how much are they tearing down their body. So we're not talking about, 300-400 grams of protein a day. In fact, I'm going to make a case today that much protein could actually be detrimental, inflammatory, and cause problems to your overall health. So it's basically important to understand that too much protein, it not only is very anabolic. So in other words, it causes a lot of insulin response. Similar to a type 2 diabetic, will get a too high of an insulin response. Now, it leads to higher blood sugar. Well, why? Because if you eat too much protein, your body's not going to break every bit of that down and turn it into muscle mass, right? It's going to have to use it. Well, there's a process called gluconeogenesis. Gluconeogenesis simply means glucose new creation. And glucose new creation happens when you have too much protein. The body's very efficient. It just takes that extra amino acids, converts it into glucose, and burns it as energy or stores it as fat. So you could make a case that actually too much protein could actually result in greater fat gain. The other reason is because too much protein, especially in the forms of like whey protein powders that are very high in what's called leucine, which is a specific amino acid. Leucine is very insulinogenic, which means that it causes a large insulin response. Well, guess what you don't want whenever you're trying to burn a lot of fat for fuel? You don't want insulin. Insulin is the storage hormone. We either store glucose away in the muscle as glycogen, or we store it away as a triglyceride or a fat in the fat cell. So you can see how you don't want too much protein around. It's just going to convert to glucose, and it also is just going to convert to higher insulin. Now, the third thing is too much protein can lead to high uric acid. And if you've ever struggled with gout before, you know you do not want too much uric acid. It's super painful, but higher uric acid just also leads to higher overall systematic inflammation, which I don't care if you're an athlete or not, you don't want high inflammation. Didn't we learn that during COVID? The people that were the most inflamed suffered the worst from that virus. So let's talk about now, what kinds of proteins does the body need? We know we don't need too much. We know we need the right amount. We know we need to pay attention to what type of person are we, the active person, the athlete person, the elite athlete. But again, we're talking about modest amounts here. So even myself, 100 to 120 grams of protein a day, and I maintain all my muscle mass. I recover enough to do all the activities I want to do. My hair's not falling out. My skin's not dry, all these things that come along with protein deficiency. But what kinds of proteins? Well, it's important to understand that we need all 9 essential amino acids. So these are essential because we do not create them endogenously. We have to eat them in our nutrition plan or in our diet. And, just off the top of the cuff, foods that are rich in all 9 essential amino acids are eggs, meats, quinoa, beans and rice, nuts and seeds, just to name a few. So to get all your bases covered in the essential amino acid category, we want to talk about balance, because I wouldn't recommend somebody go all animal-based, as in the carnivore diet, or all plant-based, as in the vegan diet. We have to have balance in our daily approach. Why? Because out of those essential amino acids, if we do too much of, like we said before, leucine or valine or isoleucine, then we have too much insulin problems. We have too much anabolism, and anabolic means too much insulin, too much growth. And that also means the growth of cancer cells, not just the growth of muscle, which everybody automatically assumes, but that also includes the growth of fat cells, because that's what insulin does, right? But we also don't want to swing the other direction and be deficient in certain amino acids and be really dominant in others. For example, the vegan diet, it's very, very dominant in certain amino acids. It's very deficient in things like leucine and valine that come along with animal products, branch chain amino acids. So you can see how fitting somewhere in the middle is probably the healthiest strategy for the average person and for the athlete, because we want to have enough of all these essential amino acids. So getting balance from, like we talk about on this podcast, the smoothie, the salad, the roasted. Why is that so beneficial when we talk about protein? Well, number one, in our smoothie in the morning, if you're using thorn products like Medibolic and Mediclear, and that's what I use, then you're getting a rice and pea protein, very balanced plant-based protein, and then they've also added in other essential amino acids to that to make it a complete protein. But then on top of that, you get your salad at lunch. Now that salad we know is not, iceberg lettuce, croutons, cheese, and ranch dressing. We know that this is a chunky, vegetable-rich nuts and seeds, this big, awesome, well, I'll just tell you what it is. It's cut cucumber, cut tomato, cut carrot, a handful of spring mix. You may have avocado in there. You may have pumpkin seeds, hemp seeds, flax seeds, cranberries, blueberries. It's this chunky awesomeness, but it's also covering a lot of your bases when it comes to a broad range of amino acids. So you can see how the smoothie and the salad work so well with that. And we haven't even ate a piece of meat yet today. Well, that's where roasted comes in at our dinner, because now we're going to have a wild-caught sockeye salmon, or we're going to have a grass-fed burger, or we're going to have a steak or a pork chop or something along those lines that really adds in all the bases are covered, right? That's what we want to think about with amino acids and protein. So you can see how the smoothie salad roasted really fits into this balanced approach that we're trying to achieve. And I don't care if you're an elite athlete or not. The only difference between the average Joe consuming 2,000 to 2,500 calories and the elite athlete that needs to consume 4,000 calories in my opinion, the only difference is not the amount of food, but it's the amount of caloric dense food. So the elite endurance athlete or something like that would literally just titrate up their calories in the form of more olive oil, more butter, slightly more protein. So you can see how those serving sizes increase, but that also it's the overall fat and carbohydrate content that make up for those excess calories. So what do I want to avoid? Well, when we talk about kinds of protein, I want to avoid conventional meats and dairy. And I'll do a whole separate podcast on why I avoid conventional meats and dairy. But shout out to my homeboy Steve. He's a client of mine. Steve used to work for Tyson Foods. And let me just say that he validated a lot of my apprehension, so to speak, when it came to conventional meat products and conventional dairy. You can easily look up the studies for yourself, but conventional meat products and conventional dairy products are heavily used with antibiotics, hormones, the whole 9 yards when it comes to not just animal quality and animal welfare, but how the quality of what they're being fed, genetically modified corn in most cases, and also the hormone and antibiotics that are used in conjunction with mass production agriculture compared to an organic, local, free-range cattle, pig or duck or chicken or anything. There's a massive difference in not only the quality, but how healthful it is for our body. Another thing you want to especially avoid is processed meats. This is like hot dogs, bologna, salami, prosciutto, like that kind of stuff is highly, highly inflammatory. It's associated highly with heart disease and cancer. There's tons of research on processed meats. If you don't believe me, do your research. This is really important stuff. I mean, I don't want to feed, if I don't have kids, but if I did have kids, I certainly would not want to be feeding them hot dogs and bologna and salami if it's heavily associated with colon cancer and heart disease and these other ailments. Not to mention that from the rise of hormone replacement in animals, so to speak, or added hormones and antibiotics, our daughters have had hormone changes, we'll say. They're having their periods earlier than ever. And you can see this very correlated when you look up the studies on this. So I don't want to get too far off in the weeds, but just do your research when it comes to like big agriculture, big animal feedlot type meats. Is it really just like logical and reasonable to believe that that's probably not the healthiest meats that we can consume? Okay, I'll leave it right there. We'll do a whole episode on that in the future. If you want to hear more about that and you want to dig into the science of that stuff, let me know in the comments or let me know on a DM on Instagram or something like that. But let's finally move on to the last one. What about protein powders? Again, this is another one that I'm just going to scratch the surface of. We're going to do a whole podcast just on protein powders because all protein powders are not created equal. Folks, if you are buying your protein powder from Walmart, please stop. The something has to make that protein powder. And this is one of those things where you get what you pay for when it comes to a protein source. If your protein powder is cheaper than all the other ones and that's your motive for buying it, probably not the best source of where that protein is coming from. So when it comes to protein powders, I'm going to give you my favorites. I'm not going to give you brand names. Other than Thorne, thorne.com, Medibolic, if you would like to check in on that. But other than that, collagen, rice and pea protein, pumpkin and hemp protein. Nobody talks much about that, but it's a fantastic source. And if I do a whey protein, I look for a grass-fed whey isolate, which thorne.com happens to have. A really, really tasty vanilla grass-fed whey isolate. And just briefly, let's touch on whey for a second, because I think this is important, especially in the fitness community. A lot of people use whey protein. you have to understand that milk is separated, the curds and the whey, right? So when you separate the proteins in milk by the curds and the whey, so to speak, you're isolating the whey out. Now, if you break that down all the way until it's pure whey protein, that's whey isolate. It's only the whey concentrate, which is a cheaper form of whey protein. It still has a lot of the milk solids and traces of casein protein, the other protein in milk. And it still has some of these other inflammatory compounds that come in milk, unless you're using a grass-fed, organic, really high-quality protein source. Then I would consider maybe doing some whey concentrate. But why would I want to do whey concentrate, period, if I can go with a whey isolate from a grass-fed source? Because that is going to be the least inflammatory, the best source of whey protein. Now, who should be using whey protein? The only people that I advocate should be using whey protein, period, are athletes, bodybuilders, people concerned with muscle mass and recovery. If you are an average Joe person that works a sedentary job and maybe you lift weights a couple times a week, I would not advocate you use whey protein. It's too insulinogenic. It's too anabolic. Unless you're using it in the right way, it can put on fat and it can keep you from reaching your goals. That's where I would use more of a rice and pea protein or a pumpkin seed or hemp protein. So, like I said, we'll do a whole episode on whey protein and protein powders and stuff like that. What are the ones that I absolutely avoid? Number one, I avoid at all costs, grass-fed or not, I don't touch it with a 10-foot pole, is casein protein. And this is the other protein, the slow-digesting protein that's in milk. And the reason why, and this has been touted in the bodybuilding community, that casein protein, it's the slow-digesting protein. It keeps you anabolic all night long. Well, the reason that it's slow-digesting is because it's extremely hard to digest, and it's hard on the digestive system. All protein, hear me out, all protein is hard on the digestive system. So this whole thought around protein, I want you to understand, if you're overeating meat and you're overdoing protein, you're putting a huge strain on the digestive system, let alone by adding these inflammatory proteins like soy and like casein protein. So obviously you just heard my next one, which is soy protein. It's highly estrogenic. 90% of the soybeans grown in the United States are genetically modified to withstand glyphosate or Roundup spray. So why would I want to eat food that's genetically modified, A, but B, it's got glyphosate and Roundup sprayed all over it, so it kills everything else, but this plant, this soybean plant, is genetically modified to be able to withstand the Roundup that's sprayed all over it. Don't get me off on a tangent on that. Just kidding. So the next one is seitan. And no, I didn't say Satan, but it might as well be Satan, but it's called seitan, and it's a wheat protein that a lot of vegans use. If you don't know what this is, just don't even research it. It's so not even worth your time to research because you just don't even need to know what it is. If you do know what it is or you're using it, please, for the love of God, stop using it. It's highly inflammatory. It's basically like gluten's evil twin brother. If gluten was bad enough, like seitan is far, far worse. So stop using seitan. Whey concentrate, again, I just went over the reasons why I stay away from that. And then again, soy protein, it's highly estrogenic, it's genetically modified. So I want to stay away from these inflammatory sources of protein. Beef powder is another one that's garbage, right? They take all like the hoofs and, tendons and weird stuff from leftover cattle, and they make a powder out of it, and they call it beef protein powder. Garbage. Absolute garbage. So don't fall for some of these marketing hypes when it comes to whey protein or beef protein. Stay far away from that stuff. If you want a good protein source, thorn.com. If you want a discount, shoot me your email in a DM or a comment or an email to musclesandveggies@gmail.com. I'll put you on my client list. 25% off the entire store. Thorne has whey protein isolate. It's got the metabolic, which stimulates metabolism. It's got the MediClear, which stimulates detox. Look, folks, if you don't already know, the USA Olympic team, the Golden State Warrior championship basketball team in the NBA, they're using Thorne supplements. That should say enough right there. Not just one US Olympic team, all Olympic US teams are using Thorne.com products. If you like what you're hearing from this podcast, please share it with someone else in your workout group or in your CrossFit box or in your gym. Hey, this guy, I get something out of it. If you do get something out of it, please take me a second. If you're next to your computer, get on iTunes or get on Spotify, leave me a review. Tell me what you think about the podcast. If there's something that you want me to cover, a question you might have, shoot it to me. I'd be glad to include it in my topics to go over on this podcast. This is Zach from Muscles and Veggies Fitness, hoping that you have a wonderful day, and thanks for tuning in.